So what I got here is an Oliver 1850. It's kind of a mongrel between two tractors and a combine. This tractor started life in 1968 as an Oliver 1850 gasoline tractor. I acquired it after it had been in a barn for a number of years. Got it home, kind of got it running, but the engine really needed a rebuild. And the gasoline engines aren't very economical to run nowadays because they consume so much fuel. So I got the idea to swap the engine and the tub, the frame, the front frame here, after I found a white 285 tractor on an online auction. The tractor had been salvaged for a bad hydraulic pump, and the pump would cost more than the tractor is worth. I acquired that tractor for $2,000, took it all apart when I got it home, and I took the 1850 all apart, and I bolted the front frame to the back half of the Oliver, and then stuffed in the engine, the clutch from the 285, and stuck it to the 1850 over-under auxiliary transmission. It all bolted up pretty good. I ran that setup for a number of years before the Perkins 6354 that was in the white 285 spun a main bearing. There's a crack in the main journal, so what I did is I went and found a combine engine out of Massey Ferguson combine. It was a 6372, so it's 372 cubic inches opposed from the 354 cubic inches of the white tractor. Same engine on the outside, just a bigger bore, and they only used that engine for a few years in the Massey Ferguson combines. So I used the fuel tank, the auxiliary fuel tank from the white 285. I had to put spacers on it. Originally it was bolted to those bolts and flushed with the frame, but I had to make room to clear the brake pedals. And I made a bracket on the back to bolt to the rear axle. I ran a vinyl line for the fuel line going up to the keg. Originally the fuel tank that I had wouldn't work on this setup. The diesel tank had a different dash that wouldn't bolt in all the way. And the gasoline tank came up and over the engine, and the 285 manifold, the exhaust pipe came up about here, and there wasn't room for the gasoline engine to fit over that without modifying it. I found a keg in the old scrap pile, and it fit in there quite beautifully, and I welded the output line and the filler neck along with the suction line for the bottom tank and the return from the hydraulic injection pump. So that fit in there quite well. I was quite happy with that. I used ratchet straps to hold it in place, along with some custom made straps that I put on the bottom. I used the old fuel tank frame and welded it together to make a nice frame and hold the sheet metal for the Oliver sheet metal. I used the bell housing and the clutch cover from the 285 and used the 285 flywheel on the combine engine. I had to move the cover plate over from the 285 engine, so I had the oil fill. Originally the oil filter was on the other side on the combine setup, so I took the white setup and used that oil filter housing. I had to remove the plug on this side and move it to the other side. It's drilled on both sides for an oil filter, but the 285 filter worked quite well. Some of these, the upgraded turbo engine had an oil cooler, but the 285 naturally aspirated engine does not, so I did not put an oil cooler on there, though I may in the future because the oil does get kind of hot and loses a little bit of pressure when you're working it hard. I had to get a new manifold. I had to get a new manifold for the combine setup because the 6372 manifold bolts do not bolt up to 354. But I found the Oliver 1850 diesel manifolds had the same bolt pattern, so I used the exhaust manifold from a 1850 and the intake manifold from an 1850 diesel tractor. I had to ground the bolt slots, or the casting in the valve cover, to get the 1850 diesel manifold, intake manifold to fit, but that was minor. I used the water pump from the 285 and the dampener from the 285. Same radiator as the 285, same fan. I had to do a little bit of grinding to get it to work, but it bolted up pretty well. The air box are bolted to the water neck of the water pump. I made this little bracket to hold the air box, and I cut a hole in the hood. It's a little tricky to get out of there, but you can wiggle it out without taking the hood off. What else? So the keg is non-vented. There's no fuel pump lifting the fuel from the bottom tank to the top. The top keg is not vented, and it draws a vacuum. And the hose runs to the bottom of the auxiliary fuel tank, and the auxiliary fuel tank is vented. So what happens as you draw fuel out through the lift pump out of the keg, there's no intake air, and it vents the bottom tank and pulls fuel to the top. So I have this clear line. I have no indicator of how much fuel is in the bottom, but when this clear line goes clear, I know that I'm only running the top tank, and the top tank has a sending unit to tell you how much fuel is left. And it works pretty well. I like that setup. You have to fill both tanks, and you want to make sure the top tank's pretty well full, because the less full you get a little more springy action, or it doesn't draw fuel as well. I use the Oliver 1850 auxiliary transmission. It's called an over-under. It's got 3 speeds so you can shift without clutching. So you have the main transmission, you put in gear, whatever gear you want. And then you got an underdrive, a direct drive, and an overdrive for each gear you're in. And there's kind of a goofy shift pattern, but you get 2 neutrals. So you have top neutral and a bottom neutral. Bottom neutral. I find it again. Top neutral. So it's kind of a double H pattern. It's quite comfortable to drive. It's got a nice long wheelbase. Makes it smooth out some of the ruts. The seat's nice and comfy. It's easy to get on and off. I have the fuel tank steps on this side and the battery box steps on this side, so I can get on either side. The only real modification to the frame I had to do is drill and tap the holes for the grill. And I only did 4 holes. There's originally 6. But I only did the middle and the back because I got tired of drilling and tapping holes. So I just have a fake bolt on these front holes. But those are the only 2 fake ones, and you got 4 real ones, and it's pretty sturdy. I mean, as long as you're not pushing trees out with the grill, you'll be okay. This is all cast iron. Weighs about 300 pounds, I'd say. I have the oil cooler for the over-under and the hydraulic system. That's out of the white 285. It has mechanical brakes. Those are the factory 1850 brakes. The chain couplers from the 1850. The white 285 has a trunnion coupler that I tried to use, but that trunnion housing has to be drilled and ported back to the rear end, which this one's not on the 1850 for the oil return. And I didn't really want to monkey around with that, so I just used the over-under from the 1850 and the chain coupler. Originally I was hoping to use the over-under from the white 285 with the trunnion coupler, but it didn't quite work out that well. But other than that, all the lines I had to make power steering lines, because originally the steel lines would have gone up and over the fuel tank and into the steering motor. Anyway, I went to Summit Racing and got some Teflon lined stainless steel hose and put it together for this power steering. But anyway, that's about enough of that thing. I'll try to start it up here and go for a little quick romp after I get the sheet metal on. Alright, so I got the sheet metal on. We'll see if it'll start right up and do a circle or something in the gravel here. I used the factory 285 tachometer, the fuel gauge from the 285, and the voltmeter from the 285. These are Bosch gauges that I got at the auto parts store. And I had the chain coupler fly apart, and it severed the cable to the speedometer when that came apart, but those aren't too easy to replace, so I never bothered with it. has been run yet. My deeper shift pattern. So if I want 4, do top neutral, bottom neutral, top neutral, over and down. And I have the over under for shifting on the fly. We'll start and under. No clutch into over. So you can make quite a sharp turn. I mostly use this on the round baler and the bale wagon. I like it. It's a nice, easy tractor to drive. It's comfortable and I can get on and off through the side quite easily. I'd estimate it's probably about 110 at the PTO with this engine, but I'm not sure. I never had it on a dyno. I do have a couple extra hills in the hood for extra speed, you know. I might fix them someday, but I'm not too concerned about it. If I ever paint it up again, I'll definitely fix the holes. A little smoky, not much. I did turn up the fuel a little bit while I was in there monkeying around with the springs and the governor. Anyway, that's the Oliver mongrel.